Hello and welcome to the first episode of 15 Minutes to Fix, the series which looks at the challenges for small businesses trading with the EU and how to overcome them. Now, the format is simple. Our panel of experts will spend the first part talking about the main issues affecting small businesses, and then a klaxon will ring, which tells us we have 15 minutes to try and fix them. Now, obviously, 15 minutes won't give us all the time to solve everything, but our hope is that we give some practical steps that can help Britain's small business community. Now, our goal is to make trading with the EU simpler. Over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be hearing from a spectrum of experts and entrepreneurs, from fashion to food and drink to manufacturing and retail, some long-standing businesses and some who are just starting out. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by three guests who each bring their own unique perspective on the challenges facing small businesses and how they can be overcome. Dan Barlow is Deloitte's managing partner for the regions and is one of the country's leading tax specialists. Emma Jones, CBE, is the founder and chief executive of Enterprise Nation, the UK's leading membership organisation for entrepreneurs and business advisors, representing over 75,000 small businesses. And I'm really delighted to also welcome Zoe Chapman, the founder of KiddyWhiz and a finalist in last year's Startup of the Year Awards and Young Product of the Year. Thank you all for joining us. Dan Barlow, let's start with you, shall we? So from what we've read and heard, over the past few months have been pretty tricky for small businesses exporting or importing with the EU. Perhaps you could tell us about the changes to the trade regulations that have come into force since the start of the year.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jamie. Really happy to. So the headlines are that at the beginning of the year, the UK implemented a system of customs declarations for all UK imports and exports. And what that means is that when goods leave the UK and go to the EU, or come from the EU into the UK, the importer and exporter needs to submit a customs declaration. It's just an electronic form, but it's quite a complex electronic form. It's got about 50 fields, and that form has to be completed and completed accurately in order for the customs authorities to clear the goods, to allow the goods to import or export. So it's a piece of regulation. It's reasonably easy to navigate, but any piece of regulation takes a bit of education, bit of understanding, bit of navigation. So that's the main thing that's changed, Jamie, the introduction of customs declarations for all businesses importing and exporting between UK and EU.
And there were obviously some delays in bringing this forward, but Emma, I mean, you are, somebody mentioned to me last week that you're one of the most connected business representatives in the country. And as you go out and about across the country and you talk to small businesses every day, what are they telling you about the current trading environment for small businesses?
Yeah, Jamie, thanks for having me on. And I don't know about the most connected. I think that just implies that I'm just old and have been doing this for a long time. So lovely to be here, because I also love anything where we can fix it in 15 minutes. So let's see how we go. But yeah, small businesses, of course, I probably don't need to say it on this vlog because lots of listeners will know small businesses have had a tough 2.5 years now. Crikey, I feel as if I've been saying this endlessly. They got through COVID, they became incredibly resilient, they became digitally and financially fit. And then, of course, the EU trade frictions that Dan's just kind of referenced in terms of added admin started to kick in. So small businesses are feeling tired. They want a confidence boost. And when it comes to EU trade, lots of them started to put that on hold just because they had other things to be dealing with. So they were looking at their domestic business. How did they keep paying the salaries? How did they make sure that they were doing product innovation well and selling to the right customers? And so anything that became too tricky got put in the, we'll maybe come back to that box. So we're hoping to see in kind of latter stage of 2023 and going into the new year, we would love to see EU trade on the rise again, But certainly, start of this year, businesses have just said, we found the admin too heavy. We'll come on to this, but logistics costs have been rising. It's just been too difficult to get things in and get things out of the UK. So businesses have just said, I've got to focus on other priorities, and maybe I'll come back to EU and indeed, beyond the EU, because that's just another thing that we're seeing is companies are saying, well, if EU trade is difficult, could we look beyond those horizons and start looking further afield? But as confidence rises, which hopefully it will, going into the next 6 months, hopefully the exports will rise in conjunction with that.
That's certainly some of the what we're seeing in the trade figures that are released and produced by the government, which is that there does feel as though there is a wait and see, and just to see how the last couple of months plays out before that confidence emerges again, as you say, Emma, to restart in some business cases, restart trading with the EU. And Zoe, you have got a fantastic story about how you set up KiddyWiz. So perhaps you could just tell us a bit about what is KiddyWiz, because I know from speaking to you already that it is something that I would really have benefited from when I had my son 12 years ago, and I've got a daughter now who's 2, and I know it's something that I would really find beneficial. But what is KiddyWiz, and why did you come up with the idea?
So KiddyWiz is the name of the company, and I am the inventor of the Wizzer, which is the world's first eco toilet for children. So yeah, it's about 7 years ago. My son's 10 now, but about 7-8 years ago, when I was potty training him, I was so annoyed with carrying around big potties. I was also caring for my dad, who was wheelchair bound as well. So I had my hands full, single mum, juggling everything, and I just didn't want to carry something around that was huge. So I looked for a smaller alternative, and there wasn't one. That's when I designed the Wizzer. But it's taken many, many years to get to the point where I could, mass produce a product. I don't think people realise the ins and outs of what goes into starting any business, let alone getting an invention made and all the things that go with it. But I chose to do it during a pandemic as well, whilst I was homeschooling. So I really stacked the odds against me, I've got to say. I had no investment. I actually, looking back, had absolutely no knowledge. So the amount I've had to learn and cram into the last 19 months has been crazy. So I can tell you there's a lot of mums that use it as well on the go. So it's a complete innovation, and no toilet product has ever been marketed beyond potty training. So yeah, it has absolutely been a game changer for potty training, but it's something that when you invest this small amount into, it's all made of silicone as well, hence the eco thing, because I'm trying to drive down the sale of plastic potties. So once you purchase this from potty training, you've technically got it for 7 years worth of wheeze and emergencies on the go.
And when you mentioned just then about how this is the world's first. When you were coming up with the design and the concept, did you think then that this was an opportunity to trade with the EU, or did you just think, well, let's just work out what my domestic market looks like first of all?
Well, hence that's why I put in there the world, because that was really my goal. There is not a single human being born on this planet that isn't going to need the toilet. So from the minute a child is out of nappies till when they're always, every human being, it's a basic human need. And unfortunately, in the UK, we're still quite behind with the way that we address it. And British people in particular get very embarrassed about talking about going to the toilet. Whereas in the EU, I've found, and across the world, they're less actually embarrassed by just talking about going to the toilet, because people know it's something we all need to do. So absolutely, I would never want to cut off. The UK is amazing. I absolutely wanted to make sure that I establish dominance there first, because it's easier. But absolutely was not going to cut off from the very beginning, the worldwide element of the Wizard. Hence the reason why any email you get as soon as you buy one says we're one Wizard away, one more Wizard closer to worldwide Wizard domination. So
Wizard domination, that sounds a fantastic slogan. But Dan, thinking about Zoe as an entrepreneur and a small business owner, she would feature, wouldn't she, as part of an ecosystem, of a much bigger ecosystem of traders and courier firms and hauliers and so on. And I know that that's something that Deloitte is really passionate about helping to solve and fix. Now, what does an ecosystem look like?
So there is an ecosystem, Jamie, you're right. And Zoe spoke really eloquently about the challenges of starting to trade internationally, because when you want to trade internationally, you have to find a haulier, you have to find someone who can do your customs clearance. Normally you have to find warehousing, probably have to find a bank as well who can do international payments, might need some bank guarantees as well. So there's a whole host, that's probably the tip of the iceberg of service providers that a business, big or small, has to deal with. But I guess where that ecosystem word comes in, Jamie, is all those players have to communicate with each other. So the haulier has to speak with the customs broker in order to get the goods across the border. The warehouse owner has to know when the goods are leaving or arriving. The bank needs to know the value of the goods in order to put up the bank guarantees for import taxes due. So there's this ecosystem where there's all sorts of players involved who entrepreneurs like Zoe need to find, but then they all need to in some way communicate with each other in order for something really simple to happen, which is for Zoe's Wizards to get from kind of A to B if A and B are in different countries. So what we're trying to do is just play one little role in that ecosystem, which is doing the customs clearance, getting the customs declarations right.
And Emma, that ecosystem has been put under a considerable amount of pressure in the last, since the start of the year. Obviously, the regulations, as we've already spoken about, have added this extra level of administration to contend with. But the whole ecosystem has faced that pressure. Is there a sector that is more susceptible to those pressures, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think product-based businesses. So, listening to Zoe and Dan, Zoe has to get a product from A to B, which involves all of those characters that Dan just mentioned in terms of logistics, protection of intellectual property, marketing in respective territories. So I think product-based businesses have found it particularly tough because everything from their costs to then shipping things have kind of changed. So dare I say, if you're a service-based business, and sorry to speak personally, Enterprise Nation is a service-based business. And we were talking about this just before we went live, but we've been expanding in Ireland over the past 18 months. And I suppose the only thing we have to ship between the UK and Ireland is people. So we don't have product, and therefore we haven't got these questions of fulfillment, costs going up and down, any kind of IP protection, how do we get things in, do we need customs clear, because it's much more knowledge-based service economy. So the service economy, of course, and actually, and sorry to bring this back to the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, but one of the biggest things I loved about the Platinum Jubilee concert on Saturday night is as I watched the creativity of Britain unfold, and I don't know if I was the only person who sat looking at the screen thinking, this is going to be so good for our economy, because, we showed what we could do with lights and drones and music and fashion, and those businesses sell their knowledge. Yeah. And of course, if it comes with the royal stamp and just another lovely kind of international trade piece, and maybe we'll start to talk about this in kind of fixing problems, is there's the Queen's Awards for Enterprise, which have a big international trade category. If you're a service or indeed a product-based business, and you can get a kite mark like that, quite literally the world is your oyster, because it still comes, if you've got a sort of a Queen's Enterprise Award kite mark on your product or service, it gives you such provenance in international territories. So I think the businesses that have particularly found it hard when it comes to international trade are those selling bulky things, products, and I think service businesses have found it that little bit more tenable to say, let's keep our international trade alive.
And so Zoe, you know, you rely on that ecosystem to work for you, don't you? Which Dan's just neatly described. And perhaps, I mean, you're not unique in the sense that you're an entrepreneur who has a global outlook and how you want to market and sell your product. But perhaps tell us about your initial experiences of trading with the EU since you established last year, and what challenges have you found?
So if I explain a little bit more about my A to B, my A to B is a few more A, B, C, D, E, F, because everything's put together from my product in China. So I have like 5 different factories. Some do the silicon, some do the packaging, some do, and so it all gets put together in China and then shipped to me. I have a warehouse in Wales, where it gets sent to, or it gets sent to my home because I fulfill my orders. Any orders that come from the website, I fulfill myself from home. And so, but then also there's other places it goes. So I've just been stocked in Jojo Mum and Baby, for example, and they have their own kind of, when they take on, they have their own route. So there's all these different shipping kind of logistics that have to go on just to get a product from where it's manufactured to the customer. And then within that, for example, Amazon, that again, another route. And for me, I guess, if I was thinking about going into the EU, because currently I do use Fair. I've started on Fair, for example, because I do get requests from across Europe. I mean, some of the countries I get requests from, I'm just like, how did you even find me? So, but I would love to be able to say to them, yes, sure, here's a box, I'm sending it to you tomorrow from the warehouse. But because of all of the issues and because of the costs, I know that if someone, this morning I got an order placed from Ireland, and I immediately went, instead of going, yes, an order, which is what a small business should be doing, I go, oh no, I've got to ship one to Ireland. Is it going to get there?
Right. Now, we've spent the last 15 minutes or so talking about some of the challenges that small businesses are facing. And that point means that we have 15 minutes to fix. So I'm going to turn to you, Emma, if that's all right. And just thinking about what Zoe has just described, is obviously there's a demand for Zoe's product right across the world. How can we make trade simpler for small businesses?
This is the bit I love, Jamie. I love fixing it. So, and it's always how Enterprise Nation has been, actually, is we never like talking about the challenges for small businesses, because bless them, people like Zoe are busy business owners. So we much prefer focusing on, right, how do we make their lives easier? And sorry to be a little bit naff about this, but I've been thinking as the discussion has gone on, I think it's, there's 3 C's. I've kind of put them into a categories of C's that I think small businesses need. The first is customers. And as you say, kind of, you know, Zoe's got them all over the world. And one thing that we have seen that's hugely enabled international trade over the past few years is, and Zoe referred to this when she said she was selling on Fair.com, these incredible online platforms, Amazon, Etsy, Depop, Fair.com, enabled huge amounts of international trade. So I think they're great enablers in terms of more businesses selling on those platforms will reach more customers. So number one thing that small businesses need is customers, and technology is making that easier. The second is kind of content and connections. And Dan's referenced this as well, is in terms of, you know, if Zoe needs lots of people from a logistics supplier to an, you know, IP patent lawyer, what she needs is almost progression through a journey. So how does content, education and training help an entrepreneur say, right, you have a product, you're looking to import or export, we'll give you the content and education and connections. And we're very happy to work with Deloitte. We've built an international trade hub. It's full of content, learning, regular webinars and events, which gives businesses that learning to say, right, we will help give you the education and training you need and connect you to specialist export advisors who can help. So businesses need the customers, they want the content and the connections to get it right. And then the third, which is a little bit more, I suppose, kind of philosophical, is businesses definitely need a confidence boost at the moment. And I have to say, when it comes on to confidence, then I kind of look to the more sort of macroeconomic picture of the role of government. And it's one thing, you know, we'd just love to see the government, and they're doing a great job of doing international trade deals. There's lots of ministers going to different US states at the moment, signing, you know, trade deals on a state level. That's all great. And hopefully once we've got through this slight political impasse of who our Prime Minister is going to be, what we would love to see is kind of much more drum beating from Department for International Trade with a message to small businesses to say, you know, there's operators like Deloitte who have come out with solutions like Customs Clear. The content and education is there. These platforms connect you to customers all over the world. And then the big role of government is to raise that level of confidence to say, right, small businesses, now is your time. We know that you've put EU trade on hold, but the kind of infrastructure has come into place to make it easier. Now is the time that Britain needs to get back out to the world. So I think if we can all work together to give those customers, the content, the connections, and that confidence boost to small businesses, I definitely think the result we'll see from that is export on the ups again. And that's good for the whole UK economy, because I know we all know this on this call, but exporters are fitter as domestic businesses as well as international businesses. So it's good results all round.
Absolutely. Now, Dan, something that Emma mentioned just then about the role of technology in giving confidence to the small business community here in the UK, and something that you touched upon at the very start, which is about the introduction of customs declarations, which, you know, can be quite confusing and complicated, but there are ways to make it simpler. And I just wonder, you know, are there methods to make the customs declaration process as smooth as possible for businesses?
There are, Jamie. I'll talk about them. Before I do, I'll just pick up on one point that Emma made and give you an anecdote on the back of that. Emma and Zoe made the point that actually online marketplaces have been fantastic facilitators, particularly for small businesses to trade internationally. We've done some work with an online marketplace, and it was really interesting, that work, because all their decisions are data-driven. The online marketplace's decisions are data-driven, and they had some fantastic data on the price points at which small businesses started to move goods freely between the UK and the EU. And the key price points were for two things. One was for haulage, and getting the cost of haulage between warehouses and fulfillment centres down. And the second was customs clearance. There's some government figures that were issued in the run up to Brexit saying that small businesses typically pay £56 per import or export declaration. So you can imagine that if the cost of haulage is going up and you're paying £56 for customs clearance, then, you know, it doesn't surprise me, Zoe, what you've said, which is, you know, break even becomes an aspiration, doesn't it, when trading internationally? So the online marketplaces have definitely figured out that in order for small businesses to import and export at scale, cost of haulage needs to become competitive, cost of customs clearance become competitive. For the bit that we do, the customs clearance, you can get the cost down way lower than £56. So I think you can get that cost down at the moment to somewhere between £5 and £10 per clearance. And I'd hope that in future it goes lower. The way you do that, as you suggested, Jamie, is through technology. So we've got a technology product called Customs Clear. That technology product uses automated intelligence. It's a technology platform. So it asks the importer and exporter themselves to input the information that's needed in order to complete the customs declaration, uses some really simple language, really simple questions. So someone who has no knowledge of customs clearance can produce a customs declaration in 15 minutes, submit that directly to HMRC. HMRC's system, CDS system, comes back straight away to let you know whether the goods have been cleared for import or export. So that's the kind of first way, and that would be for businesses moving goods between fulfillment centres. The second way that I think small businesses need help with customs clearance is, Zoe, you mentioned Royal Mail. So when small businesses are fulfilling on a B2C basis, so sending goods directly to consumers. There's a lot of the fulfillment houses, Royal Mail being one of them, that have a simplified customs declaration process. And also lots of them have a service now for what's called the Import One-Stop Shop, which is to do the VAT reporting and the VAT registrations that small businesses need in the EU if they're sending goods on a B2C basis. So, Jamie, technology can, as ever, can disrupt everything, make it simpler, bring prices down, but that has to happen, I think, in order for small businesses to trade at scale with the EU.
And it needn't be, as some people still think and imagine, filling out reams and reams of paper using a pen to make a customs declaration, because there is software out there to make this a whole lot easier for businesses.
Yeah, that's right.
We're coming towards the end of our 15 minutes to fix, but I know that we've got so much more to cover. But Dan, what would be your message to Britain's small business community who have either been put off from trading with the EU over the last 6 months or so, or a bit nervous about doing it? What would be your message to them?
Two things: be confident, and the second thing is Zoe's point around building a network. Figure out who the right transporter or haulier is for you in terms of service and price. Figure out who the best warehouse is in terms of service and price and fulfillment centres, who the best provider of customs broking and customs clearance services are. Is it a technology platform? Is it your haulier? Is it a traditional customs broker? So I think Zoe said it fantastically. Be inquisitive, build a network, make choices about, from a service point of view and a cost point of view, who the right players in that ecosystem are for your business at your point in time, I'd say.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. And Emma, what questions should small businesses be asking themselves as they are about to embark on that trading relationship with the EU?
I guess, do they have capacity? So one of the other things you have to be careful of as a small business is don't run before you can walk. So again, it's a big learning we've had at Enterprise Nation is get our model right in the UK before we look at a territory. As we've expanded into Ireland, we've said let's get international expansion right in Ireland before we look into a second territory. So there's definitely an element of learn, test, fail, keep on getting back up again. But just the other thing from an opportunistic perspective, and again, I know we've spoken lots about EU trade, there is a whole world beyond the EU. And as I say, I'm watching with great interest the trade deals that are being struck with the likes of Australia, New Zealand, what's going to happen in the States. I was out in the US last week. There's huge appetite from countries everywhere for British made and designed products. And so I think it is all around, and I'm sorry to go back to Platinum Jubilee again, but this kind of wonderful swell of pride that British people, I think, had over the weekend. How do we carry that through from an economic perspective and say, right, come on, British businesses, you make and produce brilliant products and services, you come up with amazing world-beating ideas, let's look to the world, let's ship our products out there. And I think this is what the government is trying to move into in its next phase. Is Brexit is done, we have to move on. Let's move on with confidence and ambition, and let's get our small businesses shipping to the world. So I would say absolutely do it with confidence, but of course learn whilst you're going along and desperately get support and advice every step of the journey.
Fantastic. Now, I think it is only right that the last couple of minutes should be left to Zoe, because already in the last 30 minutes, you have already secured one customer in 30 minutes, which I will be buying one of the Kiddie Whizzes for my own 2-year-old as we start our journey into potty training. But perhaps you could just tell us, what are your hopes for Kiddie Whiz?
Yeah, absolutely. As Emma says, the world is your oyster. As long as you've got that confidence, that knowledge, that support network, I think that's absolutely key. And I always say, you have to be willing to learn and listen. And I think that a lot of people they think they know what they're doing, they've got a vision, and then they go with it. But you've got to be willing to adapt and just. That's why I love Enterprise Nation, because I can, when you're busy, and I mean, I work 16-hour days every day. I don't take a weekend off. I don't take any time off. So when your time is so tight, things like Enterprise Nation, I can jump on a lunch and learn anytime. And I can, within 20, 30 minutes, the amount of information I can learn from someone that's been there and done that is priceless. And so I always say, make sure, do things like that. Join Enterprise Nation, go onto those lunch and learns, and just surround yourself with information. I was going to say as well, in terms of the logistics and who you pick, it's not just about price, and it's not just about what the best one is. I'd say trust is massive, and I'm lucky that the businesses that have got these contracts and then pass the contacts on to me, I already know they're vetted. I know they can be trusted. And for example, my factory, that's a huge responsibility to put on to one factory to mass produce a product. So you need to make sure it's right. And the only way you can really do that is by getting that from, seal of approval from another business.
Fantastic. Well, that was the first episode of 15 Minutes to Fix. And I think we could have spent a lot longer trying to fix this, but I think we've come away with some really sound practical advice and tips that small businesses hopefully can use to develop their own businesses. Dan Barlow from Deloitte, Emma Jones, CBE from Enterprise Nation, and Zoe Chapman from KiddyWiz. Thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you this morning. And coming up, we'll have further episodes where we'll be talking to experts and entrepreneurs from across the business spectrum. So do tune in to another vlog series. Thank you again.